Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's just gone 3 o'clock now, so we'll slowly make a start. That way people can still join. It's very strange for me, this one, because I can't see anybody apart from a list that numbers keep ticking over on. Obviously, it's a webinar rather than a normal meeting. So we'll get started. Like I say, I'll just do a little introduction anyway, and then if people are still joining, they're not going to miss too much at this stage. So welcome to the webinar. Today's webinar is, as it says on the screen there, how to run your first annual general meeting, or AGM. We are focusing it on sort of that first time. So if there's any of you that have done this before and you're just here to pick up extra tips or anything you might have missed, absolutely fine. But don't worry if you think, oh, that's easy, we've already done that. I know where I am on that one. It's fine and it's good if you think that. So firstly, who am I? When you first booked this, you might have seen a different name on our website to who's doing it. So I am not Linda Barlow. I am Dane Pollard, and I am a governance governance advisor even, part of the advice team with Linda. I've been at Co-operatives UK for about 3.5 years now. Excuse me, but I also do have Linda with me on the webinar today. So if we need any extra help, we can turn to her wealth of experience. She's been advising co-ops and societies and charities for a long, long time. Well, more than me anyway. And she's very, very good at it. So today you've got me, and it's my first time, so please be gentle with me. I was hoping that somebody else could move the slides on so I could do my best impression of Boris and Chris Whitty, but unfortunately I'll have to do it myself. So I can't say next slide, please, because I'd just be talking to myself. So we will have questions and answers at the end. We'll go through the slides first, but there will be a point. So you'll see there's the Q&A section on the screen there if you want to. Feel free to ask any questions along the way, but we'll mostly deal with them at the end unless there's something that is really urgent or that Linda thinks we need to address. If she'll keep an eye on them for me. Hopefully you know who Co-operatives UK is, Co-operatives UK, but if not, I shall just run through that very quickly as well. So we are Co-operatives UK, and we are the network for Britain's thousands of cooperative and community businesses, and we work to promote, develop and unite member-owned businesses that are worth over 38 billion to the economy now, according to our latest report. And we have a mission that is to promote, develop and unite. And this is not only to grow the co-op economy across the sectors in the UK, but it's also to help our members and develop them from a cooperative and general business perspective. Just to, sorry, I see to have somebody ringing through. Apologies about that if that came through. I'm not sure if someone was trying to get me on Teams. I thought I'd close that down. So just to run through promote, develop and unite very quickly. Firstly, promote. Our policy officer, James, does a fantastic job at lobbying for co-ops and community businesses. And we keep them on the agenda when the government might easily forget sometimes. And a good example of that is this year when, thanks to our lobbying, the government decided to extend its fast-tracked insolvency reforms. And I will speak about that a bit later as well, if you're not sure what that was. But they were originally only intended for companies, but thanks to James and the hard work from Co-operatives UK, it now includes community benefit societies and cooperatives. And these measures just increase the chances that societies who are in trouble, they survive as well. From a Unite perspective, Co-operatives UK holds a number of events each year, such as this one right now. But the Practitioners Forum is coming up, and that is one of our flagship events, and that is on Thursday, this Thursday. And it's still not too late to book for that, so if you do want to book, we'll include a link at the end of this webinar, and you can book yourself on that as well. And finally, to the sort of development side, where myself and Linda come in, and we advise members on a daily basis, really. And that means that I will spend a lot of my days advising new organisations, getting them ready to register, but also after the registration, they will hopefully become members. And we continue to support them through the first few months and years of being a co-op. We often get questions around how to run an AGM and the things that are needed in that as well, which is why we have this webinar today. So the learning outcomes. Just to let you know, the rest of the session will be a short presentation of the slides, and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. And obviously, like I said, there's some links that we shall share and you can ask questions about. So hopefully by the end of this session, you'll be able to understand the key items that should be on the agenda of any AGM. You'll be able to write yourself a checklist for preparing and delivering your own AGM, and understand what needs to happen after the AGM as well. And finally understand why co-ops hold an AGM and why they're important. So we're just going to start with that last slide. And why is an AGM important? So the AGM is the formal meeting held once a year by co-ops, and it's good practice to hold the AGM even when the law might say you don't need to. Most co-ops and societies will have it written into their governing document, into their rules. Why hold one? Well, we put it in the rules and we recommend that our members do have one. Like I say, even if the law doesn't require it. And the AGM is the best and sometimes the only way that members can participate in the democracy of the co-op. So therefore, it's a significant event in the calendar. Members get to hold the board and the directors to account as well. So did the co-op do what it said it would? Is the co-op doing what it said it was going to do when it was first set up? And you can use this co-op, your co-op can use this opportunity to speak to the members, and the members can use this opportunity to speak to the co-op as well. And sometimes the decision about what happens with the profits can also go on your AGM. So members can have a say in that potentially. Most AGMs will probably see the co-op elect new or confirm new directors. They might receive accounts as well. Occasionally, members might have to approve accounts, but mostly they just presented them sort of to tell you what's happened. And also they might have to appoint an auditor, or in some cases disapply the audit rule as well. I'll talk a bit more about that shortly too. So key provisions around what is necessary for AGM are usually found in your rules and your governing document, and the legal form will also dictate that as well. So the companies might have a slightly different situation than societies, but in general, things that we described today are going to be applicable for all. And you probably get bored of me saying this, but do check your rules because they're really important and they are your Bible when it comes to things like your AGM, especially from a legislative point of view. So the majority of our members that come to us with questions about these sort of things, and the majority of co-ops that we deal with these days are actually societies, but it is interesting to know on days like this what the mix is in the room. So I'm going to kick things off with a really quick poll. Oops. And if you've done or been on any of our sessions before, you might see this as a familiar one too. But we do like to know who is in the room and what the legal form is. So I'm just going to launch that really quickly now. Basic choices are going to be company, society, LLP, unincorporated, or other. The other is there for if you don't know, or if you think I haven't listed what you are. And if you want to put that in the Q&A as sort of to mention the thing, we can go through that later on as well. So I'm going to launch that poll now and just give you a few seconds to have a think about that and give us an answer. And as I mentioned, everything I say today will probably be leaning towards societies, but that's not to say that that what happens doesn't happen in the company as well. And it will be your articles or your rules or your trust deed or anything like that, your governing document that actually dictates what it is. So we've almost got everybody voted on that. Another few seconds to see if we can get the last few. Okie dokie. So it looks like most people are incorporated in one form or another. Actually got quite an even split today by the looks of it. So with nearly everybody voted, I'm going to end that poll now. And I'll share those results so you can see as well. But once again, the societies do come out on top, although there are quite a lot there who tick company. So like I said, do check your rules because there might be some things that are slightly different to what I am saying today, but the majority of it will apply to both companies and societies. We've got a couple there for others as well, so it'll be interesting to run through that later and see where we are with that. Okay, moving on. The most important thing, I think, for a successful AGM is going to be preparation. So the majority of what I'm going to talk about here is probably going to fall under that preparation umbrella. If you prepare well, it's going to make things a lot easier to do on the day. So first and foremost, you need to check your year end, your ARD, which is your annual return date. So accounts will usually have to be submitted within 7 months, and AGMs are usually held within 6 months. But your governing document will specify some timeframes, and legislation obviously specifies timeframes as well. Companies might have 9 months to submit their accounts. And the articles or the rules might not necessarily say 6 months, so do check on when you can hold your AGM from when your year-end date is. So that's the first thing. You need to know when that is, because that's when the preparation can start, really. Read your rules, because they are going to set out what is important for an AGM. They'll probably set out what you need to take into the AGM as well, what business needs to be conducted. So if we're on the assumption that we've got about 6 months to plan and prepare here, which is a good amount of time, and don't forget, you want your members to attend this meeting. You want them to be involved. So letting them know early is a really good idea. Even before the official notice, it's fine to send something out to members to say, we have an AGM coming up, put it in your diaries, something like that. So you're going to need to prepare accounts, including the audit if needed. So do you need an audit? You need to find that out first, or hopefully you might know that already. If you're a society, you're going to disapply the audit rule, and if so, are you going to do it correctly? So I mentioned that earlier as well. If you are disapplying the audit rule as a society, you need to do it in the year of account. So if you've gone past your year-end date and you didn't think you needed an audit and you want to disapply it, it's kind of too late. So make sure you know that ahead of the game. The next thing is your member registers. Time to have a look at those. Are they up to date? And this is really important because firstly, you need to know who's eligible to vote and who you can invite to your AGM. If you're having resolutions at the AGM as well, you're going to need to know who is legally allowed to have a say on that. And it's important that you know this because you'll have a quorum as well, which is the minimum amount of members you're going to need to be present at the meeting for that meeting to go ahead. And this quorum applies throughout the meeting. So you need to keep an eye on that right until the end. Obviously, if it dips below that quorum, then you can't continue. And again, check your rules to see who qualifies as present. So proxy and electronic voting, for example, do they count towards your quorum? The number of the quorum will be there and the rules around who can be present too. Next thing is board elections. Are you having those? Are you prepared for those? What will this process look like? Are you having nominees before and elections on the day? Are you doing everything before and an announcement on the day? Who can stand? What's the criteria for your directors? You want to know what you want the board to look like and how you will make that happen. And again, it has to be in line with your rules. So having a policy written down in advance about this sort of thing is a good idea, so that when it comes to this time every year, everybody knows in advance what's going to happen and everybody knows how that's going to work. Now, of course, if this is your first AGM, you're probably going to have everybody to stand down and a new board will be elected there. So again, thinking about the skills that you might want on your board and perhaps include that in criteria or information about who you're trying to get to nominate themselves or be nominated. So where and when is the next question. Ordinarily, this is going to involve looking at different venues, unless your place of business is suitable, of course. And these venues will have to be the right size, but they'll also have to be the right location. So think about your members and where they're based. How far are they going to have to travel? Are they going to need to book accommodation? And are you going to help with that? All these things are important, but obviously right now, there's some very different measures in place across the country, and we are all struggling to meet anybody outside, let alone a group of members from a co-op or community business. So it's worth mentioning here these extra measures that are around at the moment and things that are there to help us deal with that. So obviously I'm going to talk about your rules a lot today and say that the rules are your Bible, which is absolutely true. But these extraordinary circumstances and situations that the country's found itself in this year are an example of how things can change. This year in March, the government passed the Corporate Insolvency and Governance Act, and this was introduced to help struggling companies and societies, more latterly, have more of a chance of survival. Like I said before, initially it was just companies, but 2 or 3 months later, that was changed to include societies as well. And what the legislation does, it provides relaxations for co-ops and societies in order to help them hold their AGM, as an example. And that includes taking the meeting online or voting online when maybe the rules actually don't allow for that. So whilst it's very important to look at your rules, it's also very important to know when things like this, which is extraordinary and hopefully will never happen again, but when it does come into play and when it does happen. So just a quick word on that, really. So an online AGM, but on that theme, this is back to the where and when question from before. And all the points I made about locations will be absolutely right for the future, but currently, and probably for the next 2 or 3 months at least, you're probably going to be looking at holding the meeting electronically. Earlier this year, when the COVID outbreak started, we produced a lot of guidance online around co-ops and COVID and all that sort of stuff. And we did produce some guidance around holding the AGM online. So if you haven't already seen that, do take a look, and I'll include the link at the end as well. But this is a little excerpt from that page, and it's just a simple checklist of things you might want to look for when you are choosing the right platform. And this applies in a non-COVID situation as well. If your rules do allow online AGMs and you want to take them online fully, then you can do that. If you want to hold them slightly online so that people who can't turn up on the day can also join in, that's also a great thing to do. So just looking at these little things here. So the polling and the voting, you want members to vote. Obviously, you need to allow that to happen, and you want that to be anonymous, something you need to think of. Question and answer function to enable participation. This is your chance for the wider membership to get involved, and it might be their only chance, so they do need to be heard if they have something to say, and you need to think about how that's going to happen. You might want a function that enables elections to be conducted as well. So again, thinking about how you're going to do that in advance, do you need that function on the day? You might want a waiting room, so you can ensure that only people invited do attend, or as I found today, without a waiting room, people do like to join early and probably just saw me sat here doing nothing and checking that everything was in the right place. So sometimes a waiting room can be quite handy. And finally, are you live streaming it on YouTube or Facebook or anywhere that can hold live streaming these days? You might want non-members to be able to join in as well. So if you have customers, for example, that you still like to engage, but they're not really members, so they don't have a say on votes and things like that, you might want them to be able to see what's going on. So do have a research of what's out there and do test the systems as well if you can. Speak to other co-ops as well who may have been through this already, and they can give you their wisdom from both a good point and bad points. And just a side note on all of this, that those of you who may have seen our AGMs at all in the last 2 or 3 years, Co-operatives UK has been using the online options for people who can't come on the day or don't want to come on the day, and it's worked really well. We have a voting function in there that is anonymous, and so we can make sure that every single member who's attending gets the vote and can be heard. And we usually have a team, usually our membership team or someone like that, who's checking and monitoring for questions and answers, so that everyone who wants to say something can actually be heard. I will include a link to this page that I've mentioned as well at the end. So next up, we're probably going to look to the AGM papers. So this could be up to about 4 months before, really. Some people might leave it later. Some people might like to get everything done as soon as possible. But the earlier the better when thinking about these things, just so you can make changes, or if there's things you don't know about, you can learn about them and then put them in. So first up, the agenda. You need to think about what's going to be in your agenda on the day and set your draft nice and early, because it could also help you as a little checklist to see what needs to be done before the day. Next up, the minutes of the previous meeting. They're going to need to have been signed off and ready to accept at the forthcoming meeting. Obviously, if this is your first AGM, you're probably not going to have that, but subsequent ones you will need that. Your annual accounts, they're going to need to be completed and ready to be included in the papers, so you can share those with your members. Whether or not they need to approve them, you still need to be presenting them in most cases. Proxy voting, for all co-ops where governing the document allows proxy voting, then you're going to need a statement that informs the members of their right, and a copy of the proxy form, and then maybe some instructions on how to do that. And whenever you're giving people instructions for things like this, it's always worth imagining that you're dealing with someone who's perhaps never done this thing before. And so explain it in as simple terms as possible, with as much information as possible, without overwhelming people. So member votes, think about things such as resolutions, sort out which, if any, resolutions you're going to be bringing to the meeting. You're going to probably need a copy of that resolution that's going to be proposed. And in case you don't know, a resolution is sort of a proposal for any actions or changes that the members can have a say on, basically. The confirmation of nominations received for election to the board, if these are going to be circulated for perhaps a vote on the day, think about that. And anything else you want to be included. So this could be something fun. This could be you're going to have guest speakers, or a variety of different things here. But we're thinking about what you want to add on that. You know, you might want to report on the last year's work and include something with that as well. Say what went well and maybe what didn't. But celebrate successes as well. So next up, bit sooner towards the final day now, and you're preparing your official notice. So once again, we're going back to the Constitution for your notice period for your governing document. This can be as much as 21 clear days, but also as little as 7. So make sure you know how long that notice period is, so that you send it out at the right time. And remember that clear days doesn't include the notice, the day the notice is sent, or the day of the meeting. In this notice, you're going to want to, with the notice, you're going to want to send it also to people who are not there in a formal capacity, or are there in a formal capacity as well. So auditors or guest speakers, people like that. So they need to be included, not just your members who will get that notice. So what's in a notice? The date and the time of the meeting. It's sort of paramount. Obviously, though, those happening over the coming months will be online, so that place is probably in people's kitchens or spare rooms like I am today. So make sure you know when it is, the time it is, and again, think about the online part, which is the next point here. So if it is online, or there's an option of online, make sure that you tell people how they can access that. And it might be the first time that some of your members have ever tried to join a meeting online. So give as much information as possible. If you have a little video or something like that to help them understand it, that can help as well. But just make sure they know how they can join. You're going to need to know the type of the meeting. That needs to be on the notice, which is an AGM. Hopefully that's relatively straightforward. And then an indication of the business that you're going to be carried out on the day. It's important to set this in advance, and your agenda will say when each section is going to be dealt with as well. And that helps with the flow of the meeting, but it also helps members in advance know what to expect on the day. The notice will be needed to be dated and signed by the person calling or authorised to call the meeting. So your rules will state that responsibility, but more often than not, it falls on the shoulders of the secretary. You need to have very broad shoulders sometimes. They've got a lot to deal with. So a lot of what we've covered in this in this notice bit, we covered in the papers bit as well. So they kind of go together, but you need to have all the information ready to you as the person preparing for this. So if you're having annual accounts, auditors' reports, or independent examiners' reports, they need to be presented at the AGM. They must be completed, approved, and signed as required, and circulated with the notice. If you're disapplying the audit rule, of course, again, it must be done in the year of accounts. So text of any resolutions to be put to the AGM, include this with the notice. Proxy vote info, as mentioned before, this will go with the notice. And if the governing document does permit postal or electronic voting, the necessary forms and statements of how to do that and participate. So a couple of weeks out, hopefully you're only doing your final checks now, rather than going through everything. But your notice should have gone out, or may well have gone out by now. So it's looking at if you've done everything right and if there's anything left to do. So have a clear list of your members who are eligible to vote. Make sure you double check that. Know your quorum, check that. Remember, that has to remain throughout. Have you prepared for a ballot vote? Does a casting vote exist? If you're online, it's going to be a lot easier to count the numbers, of course, because it's relatively binary, but you still might end up in a tie. So still worth knowing in the event of a casting vote situation, is that applicable or not? And once more, your rules will probably tell you whether or not that can be done. If it is an AGM that's going to be online, know your method, know your system, and have 1 or 2 practice runs. Send them to your colleagues, have a practice with colleagues, have a practice with family, like I did this weekend for this webinar, but make sure you know what you're doing with the online technology, because it can always catch you out, as technology likes to do. So that's kind of a whistle-stop tour of all the preparation side of things. Worth having a tiny recap here, because I have been talking a lot, and again, I can't see anybody here, so I have no idea if you can tell what's going on, really. So preparation is the key. That's the main thing to take from that. Read your rule book, and read your rule book again, written it twice because it is important, and give yourself plenty of time to prepare. This year is a perfect example as well that, you know, exceptional circumstances do happen, and when that does happen, you just need to make sure you're in communication with your members about what's going on and about any changes to the norm that you might be making. So, you know, in the example that we gave earlier about your rules not allowing for an online meeting, if you've told your members well in advance, this is the case, we're actually allowed to do this now because of this, then they know what's going on, and on the day you're not going to get questions or you know, being put on the spot about something that one of your members might think you're not allowed to do. So just be fully prepared, essentially. So finally, we get to the day, and on the day of the meeting, you'll hopefully have done all your preparation. You'll be quite comfortable about what you're doing, and you just want the day to be a success. And hopefully, every year is some kind of celebration as well. Not only have you made it through another year, especially a year like this, but hopefully you've done lots of good things that you want to talk to your members about. So in a normal live situation, shall we say, you might have somebody welcoming members into the building. Think about who that might be. Have someone positive, maybe to try and encourage everyone to have a great time, something like that. I'm sure that can happen online as well, but it's a bit more difficult to facilitate. So you're going to need to confirm the required quorum to get things going. Hopefully you all know where to look for that now, if you didn't before, and only members with voting rights count towards that quorum. So if you have got guest speakers or anything like that, they don't count. So keep an eye on those numbers, then the meeting can just run smoothly. If you haven't already got a chairperson, appoint a chair for this meeting. And it's quite important to have a chair for the meeting, for any meeting really, because they are the ones that keeps the agenda moving, and they're the ones who will provide the members as well with any opportunities to speak and participate. So it is the chair that keeps things going. Probably worth setting out the business that will be undertaken at the start of the meeting so people know what to expect, and maybe let them know excuse me, when they can participate. So are you leaving it for any other business, for example, or are you going to take participation as you go? Let people know in advance, and then you know that they know where they're standing there. It's a good idea to have somebody with you helping you as well. More often than not, that is the secretary, but that secretary can nominate or delegate that role. Have someone helping the chair though, because when everything's happening and they're dealing with all sorts of different things, it's easily to miss little things and perhaps skip over something that was important. So online as well, that's probably just as important, by the way, because you can't read a room. So you're going to need someone to help out and let you know what's going on. Remember to take the minutes of the meeting, and this is usually the responsibility of the secretary once more, but again, that can be delegated. And we do have a template set of minutes for help with that if you like. I shall hopefully include a link with that at the end. Excuse me, but our website has just been updated, so things might have moved, so apologies if you do go to any of these links and they are moved, but if you drop us an email at advice@uk.coop, we'll let you know where the link is, but they are online somewhere. And obviously, if you're a first AGM, new co-op or community business, you are going to need everyone to step down and people to be voted on. So it's worth mentioning here, only registered members can vote. Again, we have just said that, so apologies for repeating that, but knowing who is voting and how many as well. And if they are voting electronically, think about any secure sign-in section for them so that you can make sure that only registered members do vote. Another way of doing it perhaps is the main Zoom room or whatever you're using is only for those registered members, and actually anybody else watches or interacts via a different platform. Obviously that adds more things to think about in your preparation, but it's one way to separate the two. So just a couple of extra points here. It is important that members are able to see and hear what is going on. So if it's online, that's especially important to make sure you can continually do that, because they do need to be able to participate, not just with voting, but obviously having a say if required. And if you do have speakers, maybe brief them beforehand about how it's going to work and include them in any practice runs if they can, and make sure that they are logged on early so that you know where you are and you're ready to go. They're ready to go. So after your AGM, hopefully it all went smoothly, everybody's happy, and you're moving on now to the lovely admin part of that. So filing your accounts and your annual return. Obviously this is very important, and you can probably get into a lot of trouble if you just refuse to do that or you forget to do that. So file your accounts and your annual return with the FCA or Companies House. Both now do have online ways of doing that, so explore those if you haven't already. Excuse me. The FCA one, you do have to register for the online services in advance, the FCA portal, and then they send a letter by post to the secretary. So if you want to file things online with the FCA and you haven't already registered, give yourself enough time to do that too. Update the register of directors as well with the changes that maybe were made. Again, a society is relatively straightforward to do that. You'll have your own internal register that you update, and then that will be submitted with annual returns as and when required. But obviously Companies House, you're going to have to do that on their online thing quite quickly, because you do need to update all changes there when you make a change. Online and paper versions, paper more like email really, but are both available for that. But it's obviously a lot easier to do it online these days, and it tends to be a lot quicker. Ensure your minutes are written up and signed off by the chair and shared with the other members of the board. And maybe arrange for induction of new directors as well. And if you really like, you could book onto one of Co-operatives UK's Essential Directors courses. So shameless plug there. And finally, why not get some feedback on how it went? Speak to your members, see what they thought went well, or maybe what didn't go well. Sometimes knowing the bad things can help just as much as knowing the good things. And that's it. We've come to the end of the preparation and what needs to happen on the day and after the day. So just to revisit our learning outcomes here, you hopefully should understand more about the key items that are going to be on an agenda. You're going to know about how to prepare for your agenda a bit more, hopefully, and what to do after the AGM as well. Sorry, prepare for your AGM, not the agenda. So hopefully that has made you think a little bit about why AGMs are important as well. I imagine there are a few questions perhaps that we need to take now as well. So I'll welcome in Linda for this point, and have a look now if we do have any questions.
Hi Dane, we've got a few questions coming through. If anybody else wants to ask a question, then pop it in the Q&A section of the screen. I'll read them out and then we can decide between us, Dane. So the first one's from David Baldwin. What methods are available or used to make decisions at such a meeting besides simple majority voting? When I read it, I wasn't quite sure whether you meant sort of the technology or whether you meant the actual voting itself. In terms of, you were talking about technology and methods that way, I know for our AGM we made full use of the Q&A and the chat functions on Zoom, but I know some of our members have also used something called Slido, and the comments comments back from that were that it was a great tool to use because it allowed online comments, a Q&A, and their voting could be limited to a bounded email list. So I think they uploaded their member list and it enabled them to understand actually where the votes were coming from. So that's something that you might want to explore. So I hope I've answered that question. Is there anything that you wanted to add, Dane, to that?
I'd just say that there's not one proper answer for some of these questions when it comes to online technology, and new things come out all the time. I used to think of myself as quite tech savvy, but I feel like recently I'm just missing out on everything that comes that's new. So do have a look at everything out there, and also the point I made earlier about chatting to other co-ops who maybe been through it. I think that's really quite useful. And if you can't get in touch with any, feel free to drop our membership team an email as well, and maybe they could try and put you in touch. But yeah, I just say check out the offers because there's so much available these days.
I think if anybody has found a method that they want to share, if you want to pop it in the chat,
absolutely,
we can send it out with the slides because it's useful, obviously, as Dane says, to share good practice really and share ideas of how to use technology. Now we've got the opportunity to do so. The next one's from Gareth Baker. Do you need an actual meeting link as part of the notice, or is it enough to say that the meeting is to be online with a meeting link to follow? Shall I answer that one, Dane?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think he asked another question about the waiting room functionality as well, which you might be able to join the two together, perhaps.
Yeah. The notice of the meeting must say the date, time, and place of the meeting. So normally, if you were doing it not online, you would put sort of the physical place where it is going to be. I think it's fine to actually say, if you can't, for whatever reason, give the link when you send the notice out. I think it's fine to say it'll be held online. But what I wouldn't suggest is that you send the Zoom link the day before. That might be a little bit too late for people to get accustomed to how it actually works. So good practice would be to try and send it out with the notice of the meeting. But for whatever reason, I don't think there's any reason to send it out after, any reason to not send it out afterwards if you're struggling. The waiting room functionality from Gareth again. So for the waiting room functionality, how do you ensure that only members attend? And he suggested that one way of managing that might be cross-matching to a manual members list. I think you can do, but I think, as Dane mentioned in the presentation, it might be useful to only reserve the actual Zoom link for voting members, and then to use another platform, perhaps YouTube, where people can actually log in and view it and see what's going on, but can't actually participate in the meeting itself.
I think that would probably depend on the number of members you have as well. You know, if it's a small worker co-op, for example, you've got people who are associated with whatever the business is, it's probably easier to work out. But if you've got tens or even hundreds of members, that's probably going to be quite a challenge. So then you might want to separate the two links.
Yeah, Sandra's mentioned, what is the latest legal position on delaying holding an AGM in December 2020? Obviously, at the moment, the government says that you have, it's been extended to the end of the year. So 31st of December 2020 is the date that we've been given at the moment, but obviously that may change as the COVID situation changes as well. There is information on our website that we update every now and again, as and when the regulator tells us that things have changed. So it would be a good idea just to keep an eye on that page too.
Worth mentioning here as well that with a society, it is usually your article, your rules, your governing document that will say you have to have an AGM rather than the legislation. So the part I mentioned earlier about communicating with your members, you know, if the board take a decision that actually it's better for everyone if they cancel the AGM, if you have the backing of your members to do that, you're going to be okay to do that. But obviously we would recommend to have one, but once again, it's not a legislative thing that you need to have the AGM. It's something in your rules that all the members have agreed to. So a similar thing that I said on the last question, actually. You know, it depends on the amount of members you have as well. If it's easier to communicate and maybe have a Zoom call with all your members to decide what to do for the best, then great. But otherwise, you might just have to be making decisions on behalf of everybody, which can get more difficult, of course.
The next question is from Kirsty Holtby. Are staff okay to come to the AGM if they're non-voting if they're not members?
I'd say hopefully so, because I've been to a few of Co-operatives UK's AGMs, and I'm just a member of staff rather than a member. So yeah, absolutely. And you probably want to encourage your staff to get involved. Obviously, may not be members, but they're still part of the business. And us at Co-ops UK, you know, we do feel like we are part of the business just as much. So it's nice for us to be able to attend. But again, just going back to that difference of who can vote, and make sure you know who can vote, and make sure they know who can vote as well.
Thanks, Dave. We've got a question from Charlotte Moore. I think this probably ties up with the information we've given before. So she says government have relaxed the timescale for holding the AGM until the end of 2020, which is right. And do we anticipate any further relaxation? At the moment, possibly, but until we're actually told, we don't know. It's probably likely, given the situation at the moment, but we will update our web pages as and when the regulator informs us of the position. But yeah, obviously, just keep that in mind and keep it ticking over, just to check back to see what the current position is. I don't think I answered David Baldwin's question. I think he was on about the methods of making decisions, so not necessarily the technology. Your rules will set out sort of what voting requirements are required for a resolution. So usually this is on a show of hands, but obviously that's quite difficult if you're holding it online. Other methods may be by holding a ballot vote, for example. Some meetings allow postal ballots as well. The key thing is to make sure that actually there's something in your rules or some sort of policy document that sits alongside your rules that sets out actually how votes will be taken and how the results will be announced. I hope that answered your question, David. Sandra Inns has asked, could you run through the different options on how to elect board members? Do you want to take that, Dane, or do you want me to? I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking.
No, it's all right. I just did loads before. I mean, there's quite a lot, I suppose. It depends how you want to do it. But how to elect board members. I mean, are you talking about how to run the voting? Because sometimes I think with certain co-ops, they'll list all the nominees beforehand and circulate that to the members. And then the members have time to put votes in to who they want to be elected. Again, depending on the number of members in a co-op, but you might, if you've got a small co-op, you might just decide to do it all on the day and say, you know, this person, how many votes in the room, etc., etc. It's not a great answer, but it really depends on what kind of co-op you are and how you want that to look as well. And, you know, if you're a bigger co-op with maybe you're expecting a lot of nominees and it's going to be a big process for elections, then running things prior and making sure it's all set out for everyone is probably easier. If you're smaller, it's probably easier doing it on the day. But I think, again, similar to what Linda just mentioned on a previous question, if you have a policy up front about the best way to do that, that's probably the best way of handling that, so that people know in advance how that's going to happen and how they can vote on those elections. Linda, I don't know if you've got anything to specifically add on the different options that you've come across over your time.
I think more it's about being prepared, like you say, having a system set in place that complements your rules. And sort of before you think about elections, think about the type of board members that you're looking for. So do you know what the skills gaps perhaps are on your board, so you can actually, invite, go out and seek members that have those skills. And then, like I say, you might choose to have a system where people nominate themselves. You might have an extra step in there. So you might have a a search committee that sifts through some of the applications and chooses the people that go forward through to actual election. You can run the elections beforehand, like Dane said, and announce the results on the day. I think all in all, it's about having some clarity about how people get to the board too. So if you've got that written down, I think you won't go too far wrong. Any more questions before Dane goes to his useful links? Anything burning? Anything that we haven't quite answered that you were meaning something else in the Q&A?
That's fine. We can.
Happy.
Yeah, it seems that way, doesn't it? Hopefully that is the case. But if you haven't asked a question here because you haven't had time, or you maybe didn't want to write it down in case you thought people would think it wasn't a good question, by all means email us at advice@uk.coop, and we will happily answer any questions on these sort of things. So as I mentioned earlier, we have mentioned quite a few links here. So these will be on the slides that I send around. Unfortunately, I've been waiting for the templates minutes links. Oops, that's gone the wrong way, hasn't it? And that's not finally come through. So we will hopefully have that by the time we share these slides. But there are templates minutes on there. We've got a short AGM guide, which is sort of bullet points of covering what I have today. There's a finance toolkit online as well, which is really, really useful resource for anyone who's either started a co-op or been in one for a long time. It's a great set of knowledge-based things down there. So the AGM online page that we mentioned earlier, that's on there. And as Linda said, we are constantly updating our COVID guidance around governance and HR and the business support that you can get as well. Our policy officer, as mentioned, is continually working hard to make sure co-ops are getting the same support as well. The events and training section there will be updated as and when new events come on. Obviously, we're getting to the end of the year now, so we're starting to wind down, but there will be a whole fresh raft of events next year for you to get through as well. And as mentioned, the Practitioners Forum is this Thursday, and you can, I believe, still book on that. Hopefully I'm correct in saying that. But if there's anything that you think we haven't mentioned and you think we might have a resource for, again, email us and we will try and direct you. One thing to mention here is you may or may not have seen that our website has had a brand spanking new update last week, and is hopefully going to be all singing and dancing for all your co-op and community society needs. But the one change that you may have noticed, or you most definitely will notice, is that some of the resources are member-only resources. So if you are a member of Co-operatives UK, you'll be able to log in and access these resources. And if you're not a member, you're more than welcome to become a member. So do speak to our membership team or ourselves in the advice team about that. So we've got another question just come through there, Linda.
Yeah, Kirsty's asking, sorry, I'm just replying to it, but Kirsty's
Okay.
asking what happens if we get no nominations for board directors. I think that's a problem in terms of finding out why that is the case. And it may be that for a short term, if you've got an existing board, they might have to remain in place until you have done that sort of exploratory work as to why no one's coming forward to stand for election to the board. In terms of emergency measure, the articles or constitutions usually provide for other means of getting people onto the board. So you might have the option for co-option, for example. So co-opting people onto the board if that's the case. So I think it's a lot of it's in the preparatory work really by enabling people to understand what's required of them and encouraging them to come forward. So yeah, so a lot of it's very much, don't get to a few months before your AGM and suddenly tell people that they can put themselves forward for nomination to the board. Because they might not quite know what that means. So I think it's about engaging them with them beforehand and explaining that, as part of being a member, you will have the option to stand for the board and be involved in that and encourage them to come forward beforehand. So I think a lot of it is in the preparation.
I think just on top of that as well, with that preparation, you know, with co-ops, it tends to be slightly different in that maybe you get people on your board who are not well versed at being directors, for example. But one of the things about co-ops is the sort of education and the training aspect of their members and directors. And, you know, you could encourage anyone to get involved and be a director if they have a certain set of skills or knowledge that they will bring to the table. You'd welcome them on the board, and you can help them out with any bits that maybe they're not so familiar with as well. And of course, as shamelessly plugged earlier, we do have essential directors training to help out if anyone needs it. But also on your articles or your rules, they may well have a minimum amount of directors that you need to be able to be conducting business at your board meeting. So if you have no nominations and you're having people stepping down who just can't stay on for whatever reason, if you drop below that number, you're going to have to find directors so you can carry on. And like Linda said, the co-option may be the best route there.
I just noticed that Carlton's put a comment in the chat about
Okay.
a director's induction resource ? I'm assuming that do we have one? We do have a director's toolkit that is available on our website, and in there it's got some useful resources around sort of what to be, you know, what would you get in the once you've been recruited to the board. So, you know, there's something about the role and responsibilities, code of conduct, appointment letter, and so on. So that's quite a useful resource in terms of building your own induction for directors. But obviously, the main thing is to encourage directors and tell them about your organisation. You know, tell them why it's useful and great to be a director of your co-op. And I think those types of resources in an induction are invaluable. So don't get too bogged down in the legalities of it all, but also, you know, explain to them about who you are and what you do and why they should be a board member, which sometimes gets a little bit sidelined, I think.
Cool. Just to add on the resources thing, our new website search option is actually very good. It works really well, so I've found so far. So again, if there's anything you think we've missed or you want to find, just go on our website and have a search, and hopefully there's a resource there. And if you are a member, you should be able to access it all anyway. Cool. I think if there's no further questions, we can probably wrap this up. Thank you everyone for attending today. Hopefully you've enjoyed it, and hopefully I survived, and they'll have me for another one. But yeah, thanks for attending today, and we'll make sure. Am I right, Linda, that these slides are going to get sent around with the recording as well for those who couldn't attend?
Yeah.
Super.
Yeah, after the event. Brilliant.
Cool. So look out for that. Thank you everybody once again, and if you do have any comments on our new website, feel free to let us know. As I said, all good and bad comments are worth learning from. So thanks very much. Thank you to those people saying thank you as well. That's really nice.